Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the Revolution.Aero Town Hall. We've got a really exciting one this week. We're going to be looking at where governments fit into the revolution. And we've got three complete experts. We couldn't have a better panel today. Absolutely delighted to have Kevin Slatton, a dispute partner from Pillsbury. Thanks very much to Pillsbury for sponsoring this. Kevin has got more than 20 years experience of fighting with the government. Is that fair to say, Kevin?
Yeah.
In 2007, he reduced a client's defense contract audit agency cost from 98 million to 800,000. And presumably the client still complained about your bill.
Yeah.
But Kevin's the real expert on this, and this is what he does day in and day out, is work with the government and contracts.
Believe it or not, yes, it's true.
I
know the FAR, the regulations, everything. It's all exciting.
And then we're delighted to have Ben Tigner, CEO of Over. Ben's also got more than 20 years in this area. He worked at Frontier, Boeing, Caram before splitting out as CEO of Over. And Ben, you've spent years working with the government as well, haven't you?
Yeah, that's correct. The predominance of my experience working in aerospace is specifically on government-funded programs or programs in which the government was, a collaborative participant in some way. And I think the government has a great role to play in, cultivating the technologies that have use both in the military sector and the commercial sector. And we are substantial beneficiaries of that.
Great. And David Mayman, founder of Jetpack Aviation and also star of the documentary Own the Sky. David, you're working, recommended to everyone. David, you're working on a couple of government contracts at the moment. Do you want to just explain your Jetpack Aviation project at the moment?
Currently, we're working on our new aircraft, which is the Speeder, what we call the Speeder, Al. So it's a high lift or high payload aircraft, but also very fast. The customers that we're dealing with, both on the DoD and civilian side, are looking for an aircraft that they can effectively transport with them or have with them at any time, but could still carry 1,000 pounds of payload and do 200 and 250 knots, possibly more than that. So that's what we've been focused on for the last year.
And you're coming to us from Eastern Europe, where you've been looking at parachutes.
Exactly. That's where I am at the moment, and I've got a terrible sound system here, so I can just hear you guys.
Ben, do you want to also quickly take us through Butterfly as well?
Yeah, sure. So Butterfly is an electric-powered quad tilt rotor, effectively. It's a twin-wing aircraft, so it takes off in helicopter mode with 4 equal-sized rotors tilted vertically, and then transitions into very efficient forward flight as a fixed-wing aircraft. It shares tremendous efficiency with other fixed-wing aircraft and benefits from some very specific technology that evolved over the last 20 years, funded largely through government investment that allows us to obtain substantial efficiencies, and we're able to transform those efficiencies into substantial operational and economic advantages for the vehicle.
That's brilliant, and that's sort of a great intro. Kevin, we've got lots of entrepreneurs on here, lots of investors. What should they think about when they're going for a government contract at the start, from the cradle?
Yeah, there's a lot of things to think about. I mean, there's billions of dollars, obviously, in these markets by the U.S. federal government, but there's a lot of issues. There's a lot of things that come up that you're not used to on the commercial side. There's a laundry list of things. Your accounting systems have to be different. You probably usually have to set up your own Most companies that do other things like Boeing or anybody like that, they set up a subsidiary that just does government contracts because the accounting's different, the control over the systems are different, all kinds of weird things you wouldn't expect. Like when you negotiate with the government, you have to give them all your information, which is pretty, and if you don't, you violate what's called TINA, the Truth in Negotiations Act. If another thing that's about the government is they can terminate your contract anytime they want for their own convenience, which is unheard of in commercial, the commercial arena, and they do that a lot of times. And you have some recourse, but if they want to do that, they can do it. They can just say, "Hey, this thing's over. We don't want to do it anymore," and they pay you a little bit, but. I was part of a helicopter program, a major helicopter program that they terminated just after they had gotten the helicopter to the point where they needed to be. The company shall remain nameless, but so they don't just treat termination for convenience with small programs; they do it with large programs, and it gets really messy. Also, if you have a dispute with the government, you have to keep working during the dispute. You can't just stop work. I mean, you could, and then you'd lose, but you can't just stop work. You have to keep working. So again, that's unlike anything in the commercial world. So I'll just stop there for now because those are some major things, but there's a lot more.
Yeah, I could comment and expand. One of the things that you said, Kevin, was that most certainly the big aerospace companies find that they really need to just operate commercial programs and government programs out of completely different business entities because the systems that the DoD's acquisition system forces on the company build in certain business inefficiencies that would make the commercial entity unviable. And that really is at the heart of, we are Overair, we are a spin-off of Caram Aircraft. And one of the fundamental reasons that we became Overair and spun out of Caram is because Caram wanted to continue doing business with the government. And Overair really wanted to maximize our business efficiency. And the only way to do that was to have two separate companies that are unrelated except for, social connections and the technology access that we had to the non-military aspects of it.
I would add one more thing too. The government's oversight of the supply chain, in other words, people down the chain, is increasing by leaps and bounds. And part of that is Buy America Act kind of stuff. If you're familiar with that, I mean that's been a major focus where they're, even the current administration under Joe Biden, they're increasing the percentage of stuff that's supposed to be American, right? And it's very complex of what's the American part, what's not, and it's really, but they're going to keep doing that because they don't want, mostly because of China. So if you're buying any parts from China, just don't do it.
There's one other aspect that I think is useful to think about a little bit. A lot of the contracts with the U.S. government, particularly the DoD, that involve development of technology. When you accept military funding for technology, you accept certain hooks into control over the technology. And a very important attribute that in some cases the government is willing to couple into programs is if a program contract vehicle specifically calls out that the technology to be developed is dual use, then that vastly opens up the degrees of freedom that you have in using the technology. And in our case, that was a complete game changer. The current Future Vertical Lift program had a very significant progenitor, the Joint Multi-Role JMR program, which was specifically a technology development and maturation program intended to support future vertical lift. But because the JMR program was specifically labeled as dual use, that meant that the technology developed and matured under the JMR program could be used within ITAR restrictions and those kinds of things for commercial programs. And that's actually been absolutely critical for us because a lot of the technology that we use on Butterfly wasn't originally conceived under the JMR program, but it's substantially vetted and matured under the JMR program.
Yeah.
David, you've having heard all of this, you have defense contracts, How are you finding it? I know we've got a message from Bill Johnson saying Agile Prime is using dual-use technology paradigm as well.
Yeah. We've been part of the Agility Prime and the AFWorks high-speed VTOL challenge. I think Agility Prime itself can't write you a check. They can support you with a memorandum of support, and then you can take that into a CIBA program, which we did under 20.3. We were found acceptable but non-funded, and then reapplied under 21.1, same result. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on in the background in terms of the way that these CIBAs are being evaluated. There is no Air Force component to 21.3, but there will be, because that's all going Space Force, and then there will be for 22.1. So we'll reapply again into 22.1. These all, of course, take an enormous amount of time and energy. Any CIBA response, if you're doing it yourself internally, I was relatively naive when I did our first one. It took weeks and weeks of the team's time. And, I think I overestimated, we're a small team, a small startup, great investors in Silicon Valley after the Y Combinator program. I think I overestimated how excited they would be with military interest, because they also see it as the precipice or the valley of death, that you could just be bled to death in waiting.
Along those lines, one thing the government has been doing is using what's called other transaction agreements, or OTAs, which don't. I don't know if you've been involved in any of those, but they don't require the FAR regulations to cover things. So they're very wide open, and the government's funding more and more of these. At least they had been. And that's kind of an area where they realize they need this technology, and they just can't get it to the regular channels easily. So they just do an OTA, and it's a lot easier.
Yeah. The OTAs are a tremendous vehicle. So either if you're a large ongoing entity, in order to qualify for an OTA, my understanding is that you need to typically chip in something like a 50% cost match. And if you're a small entity, then they let you out of that requirement in the interest of trying to cultivate innovative small business.
And one of the issues in OTA and everything else, I'm sorry, IP rights.
No, you go.
IP rights are one thing in the OTAs. There's an issue there, and there's always an issue now. The government wants as maximum IP rights as it can get. It depends on a lot of things, like supposedly if it's government funded or if it's privately funded, and there's a lot. It's an area you're going to sell your stuff to the government. And you want to maintain the control of the IP rights. You just have to be very careful.
Yeah. I was just going to say that we've found the cooperative research and development agreement approach quite successful. We have two of those, both with SOCOM, one with the Navy NSWDG on the East Coast, and one with Fort Bragg, the Army Special Forces. And whilst that doesn't provide you with cash funding, it certainly helps you socialize your concept within the a very focused area within the DoD to show an interest in your technology, and to spend time with the operators that would in fact use the aircraft. So under our NSWDG crater, we trained one of the SEAL team operators to fly our jetpack, and that gave us some very clear understanding of how they would actually operate the aircraft and how we would need to modify it.
But your investors weren't particularly excited by that, David.
Say again, Al?
Your investors weren't that excited by the military side.
My investors have been around for a while. They've seen everything. They said they believe it when they saw the procurement contract signed, sealed, and delivered.
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging for the government to be a truly good customer, right? Because they are they are subject to the annual funding cycle, and it's very, very political what drives the annual funding cycle. And any given military leader can sign up to be interested in a particular project, but who's to say that 2, 3, 4 years from now,
Right.
the winds have changed? And that's the U.S. federal government is inherently in that challenge, and it makes it very difficult for people who want to invest in something to look out 5, 10 years ahead and say,
Right.
yeah, I'm convinced I'm going to make money. It's much easier there's still a lot of risk in the commercial regime as well, but you can sort of count on human nature to percolate in certain predictable ways, whereas the government, it's not necessarily as predictable.
Ben, you've been out successfully raised. Oh, sorry, David. You go.
No, I was just going to say, to some extent, rightly or wrongly, it's also based on the relationships that you develop over time within the DoD.
Right.
And for example, with Navy Special Warfare Development Group, we had built up the relationship with a rear admiral. They have typically 3-year posting cycles. When they move on, then the replacement may not, they may not be interested at all in that particular piece of technology. It's just like selling in a corporate environment, and all of the work that you've done could be, could be out the window.
Yeah. That's true.
One of the features that I find most interesting about the government interaction, and this is going back to the technology development that happens under the dual use regime, is very often it is the case that the eventual application to which the technology is put is a little outside of the bounds of what was envisioned when it was originally put in place. So people make all kinds of examples about that the internet was created as originally as ARPANET, and then expanded and took on dimensions that we here are talking because ARPA put in place certain technology protocols way back when. Much closer to our industry currently, the DARPA Grand Challenge was really kicked off the current wave of self-driving cars. All the technology, the enthusiasm, the recognition that this was an important capability that was within sight was something that Tony Tether and the program managers at DARPA envisioned more than a decade ago, and they put in place a program specifically to encourage that, not really knowing where it would go, but knowing that it was going to have a pretty profound impact. In our case, I think the same thing has played out under the Joint Multi-Role Program. We were tasked with maturing and vetting some underlying technology that we already had, where the goal was to imbue vertical lift aircraft with higher levels of safety, much quieter operation, and much more efficiency than had previously been possible in vertical lift propulsion. And the military objective was greater combat effectiveness and lower life cycle costs, right? So safety is important in both military and commercial spheres. Quietness in the military sphere, it's all about survivability and reducing detectability of the aircraft for military objectives. Quietness in the commercial sphere is very clearly, it's something different. It's similar. You don't want people to detect you, means you don't want people to be annoyed by you, because the higher the noise output, the less receptive city leaders will be to allowing dense operations. And efficiency is an interesting one. Efficiency is all in the military sphere. Efficiency, the ability to produce a lot of thrust using a small amount of power, is all about trying to reduce the engine size and reduce the cost of the vehicle, because the engine is one of the predominant costs in the vehicle, both procurement cost and maintenance. But in the commercial side, at least with respect to battery-powered advanced air mobility, efficiency means you're able to load more capability onto the vehicle than you would otherwise if you weren't so efficient. And in all different branches of AAM, being able to build more capability into the vehicle is going to be critically important for maintaining safety. And safety is going to be critically important for standing up a productive and economically viable industry. So even though the military objectives were aimed in one direction, the underlying physical attributes that the technology developed to support those military objectives ended up being really, really useful in the commercial arena for reasons that were not really envisioned when the dual use program was initially constructed. So I think that kind of thing plays out all over the place. Velcro was invented by the space program, right? Well, Velcro is used on kids' shoes now. It's great.
Well, you raise an interesting issue of commerciality. I mean, if you could, the stuff you're selling to the government meets the definition of a commercial item, you can evade a lot of the rules that otherwise would be very be problematic, not problematic, but would be very difficult to navigate. So, but the commercial item, the definition is it's sold basically for the public use, or it's going to be sold. And sometimes the government fights that, but if you can do it, you can eliminate a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Alistair, you are muted.
Sorry, I had a dog come in my room, which is why I'm muted. Kevin, do you have to do that at the start of the contract?
Most of the times, yes. The government will make a determination whether it's a commercial item or not, and that's sometimes you can argue it later, but that might be too late. It's better to get up front. The government agrees it's a commercial item. They have a process for doing that.
And I think also significant is if you come into the program with pre-existing technology that you clearly have ownership, and the government will build some sort of a cooperative development program, then that gives you a lot better leeway than if the technology is really created initially conceptualized under the government program. That's really for us, that's been a critical element.
Right. You come with rights already. You have to put certain labels on your whatever you're submitting to the government to ensure those rights are protected. Because there's cases where somebody really owned the rights, but they didn't label it as limited use or whatever, and the government got wide open use just because they didn't label it right. And that's more and more becoming an issue. So, yeah.
Right. I don't know if it's normal business, Kevin, but when we were negotiating, and I say negotiating cautiously, the Crater agreements, we were successful in carving out quite a lot of intellectual property.
That's good.
In those discussions.
Yeah, but you have to do it. You have to be proactive, or else you're going to lose it.
Yeah.
Right. You have to. It's very helpful if you can come in with your list of here are the 30 patents that we have, and we're going to use these patents to provide a product for the government that is helpful, and we're going to use the government funds to mature and vet and expand that technology portfolio.
Yeah.
We've got a great question from Bill Johnson. NASA's position should be more aligned to the advanced air mobility market than DARPA or AFRL. Why are they not taking a more aggressive posture in tech development? Ben?
I would say that they are looking at the areas where where the industry and other parts of government are less effective than they are, and they are trying to construct programs that fill in the gaps in the ecosystem. So, PK at NASA Ames working on airspace management, the NASA Grand Challenge, trying to, use NASA assets to really explore what vehicle operations are going to look like using these vehicles that have different capabilities than helicopters, but are in some way similar to helicopters. I actually think that they are contributing. Now, you could always say, well, they should be pouring more money and more resources into it, but NASA is generally constrained in what they can do.
Yeah, and DARPA recently came out with their personal VTOL open topic. Effectively, they're looking for something that can move somebody 5 miles, but it needs to be transported by a single person, needs to package down into Pelican or similar types of cases. So, there is an interest. I think it really comes down to project manager by project manager demonstrating some, some entrepreneurialism, so to speak.
I will, on the thread of entrepreneurialism, I will also point out, the tone of what DARPA is doing NASA is doing is a little bit different than it was a decade ago. I think we have to give some credit to DARPA and I'm saying DARPA, to Mark Moore and NASA in promoting the idea of distributed electric propulsion that has been thoroughly embraced by a lot of the eVTOL industry. It wasn't NASA alone. It wasn't only Mark Moore. DARPA also played a role in selecting the Lightning Strike aircraft that embraced distributed electric propulsion before other DoD programs did. Now that particular product was not ultimately successful, but the idea of distributed electric propulsion and exploring all the different ways that getting away from turbine engines in VTOL flight could benefit you. That really was something that was promoted very hard by NASA early on, and is a direct, forebearer of a lot of the things that are going on right now.
I would guess. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, Kevin, please.
I would guess that a lot of DARPA stuff is in the black world, so to speak. Are they black programs, or when I say black programs, I mean highly secure, no talking. You have to have a clearance, basically.
Skunk works.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Well, and if you're a contractor who has never done that, that can be an issue because you've got to get people. It used to be real easy to get clearances. Now it's much harder. Then you have to have a facility where you keep all the documents, and there's a lot of administrative work for that kind of stuff. So I just point that out for the people who've never been involved in black programs. So,
fortunately, for the most part, when DARPA has done programs that are of an aeromechanical nature, so if they're working on some crypto coding system or something, then that might be black, start to finish. But aeromechanical things, the aeromechanical part that makes the propulsion more efficient or quiet or whatever, those tend to at least have pretty substantial public-facing, visible elements. There may be niche elements of it that are, if you have some particular airfoil magic or something that makes it quieter, then that portion might be classified. But by and large, they tend to be pretty pretty open on the aero technology portions of it.
David, is there an advantage in going on the military certification route rather than the civilian one?
Yeah, it's something we're still working on. We've just brought our certification engineer on board, Al, and for us, for the type of aircraft that we're designing, if it's going to be used in a for manned missions, then yes. In the end, if Special Forces wants to make the decision to use our aircraft, then they base their decision on our testing results. But it's up to them. It is simpler than Part 23.
And Ben, do you have any comments on it? You've been through both processes.
I'm sorry, what was I didn't quite catch what the question was.
Is there an advantage or is it very difficult doing military certification versus commercial certification? Are there big differences? And is it easier to get military?
Yeah, I don't know that I would say it's easier. It's just a different regime. The two tend to have different priorities. They rely on a little bit different standards. Certainly, knowledge of one helps you understand the control regime of the other. That's for sure. But the FAA, I think, sees themselves as protectors of protectors of the public in a much more broad-reaching way than military qualification does, and so I think their priority is a little bit different.
If you your means of compliance from the outset for a Part 23 certification, then you will. I think that you will find it easier to get through military cert with that in place.
Yeah, I think it probably goes more that direction than the other.
Yeah,
but not in every case. But we've started. We've in this conversation we've mostly focused on when we say government involvement. We've mostly been thinking in terms of the DoD. But now that we've sort of touched on the FAA a little bit, it occurs to me to mention that at least in my circle of AAM, it's becoming clear that it is not only the U.S. federal government that is beginning to play an active role in cultivating these things. For the first time, state and municipal departments of transportation are starting to take an interest and play a role, whereas primarily they thought of aviation as something regulated by the federal government. Their job was to deal with ground transportation, trains, ports, highways, things like that. A lot of state departments of transportation have started to take an active interest and participate with companies, participate in development of infrastructure. And I think that's a really, really interesting development. And I will also mention from our specific interest, the federal government or the national government of Korea is also in the midst of developing a very aggressive urban air mobility policy by which they're putting in place a number of initiatives that are motivating the Korean industry to become very, very active in this area. And so you see things, Hyundai is probably the most visible, but our investor Hanwha is a very, very big participant. KAI, Samsung, SK, they are all doing things that are collectively pushing Korean industry and the Korean government forward in urban air mobility. I would say, as given that Korea is a reasonably small country, relative to the United States, the United States government is being supportive, but the Korean government is being really supportive.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Which again raises an interesting question: is if you're not going, do you think you'll be flying the Butterfly first in Korea?
That is an excellent question.
Should we move on? David, what about your thoughts on other regulators?
I've had some exposure to the New Zealand Aviation Authority, and they seem to be very interested in assisting AAM. We have Larry Page's group down there, and so that's one of the avenues that we're looking at working with. I'm from Australia originally. I must say that CASA seems to be a little further behind, or significantly further behind the New Zealand CAA. We've worked with the CAA in the UK quite successfully so far, and a lot of dealings with the FAA on the experimental certification for our aircraft.
For an Australian to say nice things about New Zealand, there clearly are.
But there's nobody watching. There's just the four of us.
Yeah. Kevin, if you're going back to if I'm trying to get government funding from the US government, are they relaxed about me also having activities in places like New Zealand or Korea?
Yeah. I think New Zealand's okay. I mean, it's really about China. Everything's about China these days. And my dog joined the conversation behind me, in case you were wondering what.
I saw you. I can see you.
I'd let him in, or else he stood at the door howling. Yeah, I mean, it depends on the country. I mean, of course, the U.S. has a huge foreign military sales system whereby the U.S. sells stuff to many countries. So that has its own set of rules and everything. But a lot of companies have done that over the years recently. Yeah, I mean, the U.S. is going to look at who you're doing business with. They're very concerned about that these days. Very concerned. So,
okay.
Yeah. In our case, with our dealings with Korea and the Korean government, it's certainly a very, very important attribute that the South Korean government is a very, very close ally of the United States. There's lots and lots of technology ties. We have a huge army presence on the Korean Peninsula. All those things really make it a lot easier for us to be able to work in a dynamic way with Korean companies.
Okay. I was going to add. Let me add this. Maybe this is a part of it for the audience. If they're doing mergers or acquisitions, they really look at it. There's a. It's not really an agency. It's a committee called CFIUS, which is Committee for Foreign Investment in the U.S., and they're made up of various people from various agencies, and they used to just sort of rubber stamp it. Not anymore. They look real hard at who's buying what company and what technology can be transferred. The rules are changing now. We're waiting for some regulations on, what's considered critical technology. So, that's if you guys are doing M&A, you got to watch out for that.
Yeah, and CFIUS is particularly challenging because in many cases, it's acceptable for you to go and accept an investment, but then the CFIUS committee has the ability to disapprove that investment after the fact. So if there's any doubt whatsoever, you're really well served by making a full disclosure and going through a process with them. It's not, in most cases, it's not legally binding to go through the process in advance, but really bad things can happen if you don't, and there's any doubt about the deal, because it has happened that people have had to give back the money.
To that point,
obviously extremely disruptive to business operations.
We went through that process with our last round, and it took longer, but it was a clearer outcome.
Yes.
Even though it took longer during the process.
To your point, CFIUS was expanded, I think, in 2018 or 19, where it used to just cover, companies, whatever the company was buying the other company, acquiring the other company. Now it includes the investors. If it's an investment company, they look at that, and they also look at real estate. If you own real estate, if your company owns real estate within 100 miles of a base or something like that, they're going to look at it because they don't want foreign entities to be that close to our military bases or any of our facilities. So that's going to continue to happen. They're going to continue to make sure that no other foreign entities that we don't want, that they're again mostly China. They're gonna unwind, like Greg said, they're gonna unwind the transaction. If you don't make a disclosure, they cannot, and then they find out, hey, somebody they didn't want was involved, or the foreign ownership is not one they like, they'll unwind the whole transaction.
Which is not great if you're a startup burning through cash quickly.
No, exactly. No. And what about components? At the moment, we have to have all of our components manufactured and sourced from in the US. COVID has even made that more difficult.
Yeah.
But every transistor, every sensor, every single thing in our computers.
Okay, Ben, what could governments do, or government agencies do better?
Well, returning to the issue that we raised at the very beginning, which is most business entities in the United States decide ultimately that, it's this path or that path. You're either going to work for the DoD or you're going to not work for the DoD. And breaking down the various barriers, I mean, if the DoD sees the benefit in drawing in, the commercial investment in products that are predominantly oriented to the commercial world, then they need to find more mechanisms for easing that path for companies that are not primarily focused on the DoD. One mechanism that people do is, is if I design a commercial product and my market is and I'm primarily aimed at commercial markets, then some other company can buy my product and retrofit it for military purpose, and then that retrofit company is the military contractor. But I think the military would, draw benefit from being able to interact directly with those companies. But so the more that they can do to reduce the burden on companies to do business with them, that would be, a great benefit. And things like the OTA agreements that reduce reliance on full compliance with FARs, those help, but they're not enough.
David, what can government agencies do to be better?
Well, certainly having written several cyber responses, there's a whole lot of stuff that could be cleaned up there. That's a huge burden for a small company to go through. And without wanting to use consultants to drive that process. And I know that they're certainly looking at that. I think that having a clear path from a cooperative research and development style non-cash agreement through to perhaps combat verification testing, through to a procurement option, a clear pathway that you could follow if you're demonstrating value, if you're demonstrating an aircraft that is fit for purpose. I think that would be awesome. If you take our case, we have an aircraft that's flying right now, and at the end of the crater, that a process of combat verification and then moving into a procurement process would be perfect for us.
Kevin, do you see this changing?
I've been in this for a long time, and the government has repeatedly said they want to become more commercial. They want to make things easier. They want to be able to buy things. They say that, yet on the other hand, they're adding regulations, adding rules, adding barriers. So I don't see that changing. I don't know. There's people who are pushing for change in the government, but it's a big boulder to roll down a hill. I mean, they just roll up a hill. I mean, it's just there's too many vested, like for just simple things like if you're involved with DCAA, I don't know if you are, the Defense Contract Audit Agency, who audit the government. I deal a lot with them. You have a meeting with them. You'll have two people from you and the contractor, me and the attorney and the contractor, and they'll have 20 people in the room. They just do things on a daily basis that are just not cost effective, and these people are all concerned about their jobs, etc. So they're gonna find something wrong with something, and that kind of drives it. I mean, that's what I see. So sometimes they're better, and a lot of the old. It's also the workforce. A lot of the older contracting officers who really have the authority to speak for the government. A lot of those guys are more reasonable. The newer, younger people who don't know as much and haven't been around as much, they just check a box and okay, you didn't do this. Check a box, and it's ridiculous. I think they're trying to get better, but it's hard.
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly found that individual program managers who are interested in pushing, they have a genuine desire to push technology forward, to get more innovative products into the military workflow. But it's people at the working level still have to work within the system, and it's very difficult to see what top-down structural changes are in the works to make that make it easier for the working level program managers.
David, you'd agree? David, would you agree? Is it very much reliant on the individual you're dealing with?
I think that's true, and we've certainly seen a case where we had developed a great relationship, as I mentioned before, and spent an awful lot of time demonstrating our technology, working through with end users how the technology would be applied, and then to have that that person move on and have to start again. And I come from a software background originally, and I understand the concept of having to build commercial relationships. It's no different. When we achieved the initial experimental, the special types, the special airworthiness certificate, experimental for our jetpack, that was very much based on building a relationship with the FAA. That wouldn't have happened for sure without a degree of trust and understanding, because it's not every day that a company says we're going to build something that you can strap on your back and fly at 150 miles an hour with.
As the scars on your legs show. Going back to touching on China and the American relationship, and the big things driving the world, are we going to end up with two types of UAM or advanced air? Are we going to have what's going on in China and what's going on in the rest of the world? Ben?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's hard to predict that kind of thing. I mean, China certainly has embraced the notion that they are in a grand competition to become predominant in sustainable everything, sustainable energy, everything. Solar cells, batteries, electric vehicles, all those things. And it will only time will only tell whether those evolve in two independent silos, or whether there's some way to rejoin them in some path. And if they evolve into independent silos, it's really will be up to the quirks of fate, which one ends up being more dominant. I mean, the Chinese government has the efficiency advantage of having much more of a command structure in place that they can just decide and go, whereas our democratic system is much more chaotic. It's much more economically powerful, but the efficiency with which we go after certain objectives is much lower, simply because we keep changing direction every 4 years. The administration puts different sets of incentives in, and different technologies thrive or wither, depending on what direction we're going today.
I agree, but if you look at the way that the FAA is now handling manned UAM or advanced aero mobility, it's chalk and cheese compared to the drones 10 years ago or so. So the fact that China is there is why we're seeing such a change from the FAA, and they don't want to see the same thing happen again, for sure.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. It's very clear that the FAA, has gotten the memo that they need to be very supportive of the AAM industry, and they've been working very, very hard. And they are challenged with a large multi-pronged bureaucratic system, and each of the elements within the FAA is handling it in their own way. But they are all supportive and aggressive and trying to push the ball forward. So I certainly have to hand it to them. You're right. The response to AAM relative to the FAA's response to unmanned aircraft a decade ago is just night and day. Night and day.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm fairly pessimistic on a lot of cooperation between Chinese AAM companies and US AAM companies in the short term, but that'll probably turn full circle.
Look, if Australians and Kiwis can work together.
Let's talk about rugby.
Or cricket at the moment.
Anything.
Okay, so going back to the first question. This has been brilliant. I've learned a lot. Kevin, what would you going back to first, I've got an idea, I've invented something that I think has got a military application as well as a commercial. What should I do apart from hiring you?
Well, you don't need to hire me. You need to, hire somebody from the government and then, no, that would be a conflict of interest. Never mind. Well, you try and get in one of the programs. It depends on the technology and how its potential applications. You might try and get in the SIBRS program, like we were talking about. You might try to get a sole source contract and say, hey, look, we're developing this government. You have to do some business development and, on the government side, hopefully find somebody who says, hey, yeah, I like to fund that because it's a funding issue as well, and you said dual use, so it's got a commercial use as well.
Yeah.
So if it's commercial, then it's commercial. I mean, that will be easier. If you're going to make something for the government, then it gets harder. If you have a cost contract, it gets harder. And usually development contracts are cost contracts. And I haven't even touched on that. There's all kinds of government accounting rules that if you're not familiar with them, you can get in trouble of what allowable costs are. They're very limited. So, yeah, I'd find some in the government to support it or show your technology to somebody and say, hey, we think this has a dual use, a government use, and get them excited about it. That's what I'd say. Because that's the beginning of it. You got to. I'm usually coming at the end. Unfortunately, after it's all the bad stuff has happened and there's bodies lying all over the place, that's when I come in.
I'd like to sort of expand or discuss a little bit something that Kevin just said. His initial thought was, well, hire someone from the government, and he said, "Oh no, you can't do that. That's corruption."
Well, yeah.
But there is some right there. That is a commonly done thing, right? The halls of Boeing and Northrop are lined with people who've come from the government, and you could think of it as trying to influence the government. But I think there's a much deeper dynamic at play there. The government is a very, very complicated social organization. And people who understand how it works, understand the politics, understand the channels of communication, understand the touch points, the priorities, the sensitivities, people who understand that are very, very valuable to the business sector. And quite apart from influencing any of their former colleagues, understanding and being able to predict what they will do is incredibly valuable. So it's not surprising that Boeing and Northrop are, all the halls are lined with offices filled with people who used to work for the government.
Right. You just have to be careful that they're not helping you with the program they worked on. Basically,
that's correct. But the
world. That's why they get hired, because they know
the world is a very big place.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's certainly a number of them around. Yeah, I would add to that, if I can, Al. If you're a startup entrepreneur, you have a small company, you've got a great idea, look at the accelerator programs. We went through Y Combinator, but there's also, there's Starburst, there's Techstars, there's NYU Stern, Endless Frontier Lab programs. All of these programs have extraordinarily deep connections in the government and in DoD, and there's an implied credibility that comes with being part of those programs, and you'll have a lot of doors open to you. Whether you can close any deals is really up to you, but it's great for opening doors.
Bill Johnson has just said, Ben, you're talking about me, 26 years Navy, 13 years Northrop Grumman, although maybe you aren't because you said they're valuable. I think he's...
little self-deprecating.
Very highlight. Bill's also said he would recommend looking at the Special Operations Command community. They're more off the shelf for buying products. David, you'd agree with that?
Yes. Yep, for sure. And then finding a connection within the soft community. That's true, Al. Yeah.
Great. Well, I think that's been fantastic. Any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with, Ben?
Well, just since you mentioned the soft community, our historical experience also has been that the soft community are willing to think outside the box. They are more empowered to ask for forgiveness rather than ask for permission with respect to other places in the government, and so they're able to move more aggressively. So yeah, our experience has certainly been very positive working with the soft community. Look, as closing thoughts, it's clear that there are a huge number of different ways that the government interaction can be helpful. I think, from the seat that I sit in, commercial markets are much larger than the military markets, and so that is going to stay the predominance of my effort. It has to push in that direction, but whenever there's opportunities that we can work collaboratively with the government to provide militaries with what they need, I'm very receptive to doing that. But it has to be in a mode that makes sense from a commercial perspective. And very often that ends up foiling efforts to work with the government. But wherever it doesn't, I think we should all be as supportive as we can.
And you're speaking from the perspective of a lot of over airs, and your butterfly is built using knowledge that you guys gained from years of defense work. Absolutely. And I have to say that the people who supported that the JMR development have been nothing but supportive of our application of the technology in the commercial regime. They've cheered our success. So I'm tremendously grateful to their support, and at the same time they're continuing to support the same technology going forward on the military sphere as well. So I think once we reach a level of maturity with our product, I'm sure that they will benefit in the long run by products that will become available in the future that benefit the military. I'm convinced of that. So I think their faith is well founded. Brilliant. Thanks so much, Ben. David, closing thoughts?
No, I'd echo that, Alan. I think as a startup, don't just focus on the military, because it can be a long bleed. It can take you a long time, and in the end, it is a smaller market. I'm a great believer in build it and show it off. Rather than spend a heap of time developing relationships and demonstrating PowerPoint presentations, find a way to build it, even if it's a scale model. Show it off, and you'll create the interest.
Great. Kevin, your final thought?
I agree with what was just said. I think that's exactly right. And I would also say, don't hire me, but get somebody on your team. Get somebody on your team. I can't believe I just said that. Get somebody on your team. Get some people on your team who've worked with the government. Don't go in. I mean, you gotta have somebody who can help you there, because you don't know what you don't know, and that can get you in major trouble. I don't want to be the blood on the highway guy, but there's the False Claims Act and stuff like that, where you can get in big trouble for something that doesn't even seem like they'll call it fraud, but it's not really that. It's just like a misstatement or something. And they're very aggressive. DOJ can be very aggressive if they think there's a false claim, and false claim doesn't mean you intended to defraud the government. It just means you were in reckless disregard. In other words, you should have looked at something and you didn't. And that's a very low level to pass. So yeah, I hate to throw cold water on everybody, but I'm just saying that's why you need to have people on your team when you start working with the government who have done that before.
So basically, you don't let your commercial business development people in the same room.
Yeah.
Thanks.
The Cowboys? No. We another room.
Thanks so much. It's amazing to have, I don't know how many years, more than 50 years of experience from you guys. Unbelievable. Thanks so much, Ben Tigner from over, David Mayman from Jetpack Aviation, and Kevin Slatton from Pillsbury, who would like you to hire him, despite what he's saying. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for joining us.